Well, good evening, dear friends. I'm speechless after this magnificent performance by Armand. It just was excellent. Yeah. Hi, John. Last time that we were here together, I asked friends if there were any subjects that they wanted me to talk about. There were two requests that came. One was immediately after we broke for refreshments, and that request was to talk about education. The second request came later through an email about the challenges of how bring frankness and compassion in the Baha'i consultative process and in Baha'i discourse. So in the next number of times that we are together, I will focus on those. However, and possibly some other issues, God knows what happens. But we begin with the idea of education. And in my mind, education, of course, starts with ourselves. If we want to educate other people, our children and our students, then we first have to focus on knowing ourselves. Because if we don't know something, we cannot give it to anyone. And of all knowledge, it is my understanding that self-knowledge is the most crucial, the most important issue. And we will spend some time this evening together about the idea and concept of self-knowledge. As you know, self-knowledge has been the object of a study from the very beginning of time when humanity started reflecting and thinking. From that very beginning, the question was, who am I? Why am I the way I am? Why I feel the way I feel, why I think the way I think, why I do the things that I do. These are the questions that humanity has been asking. Who am I? What am I? Why am I? Socrates said, know thyself. And he didn't know himself either. He said at the end, now I know that I don't know, which is exactly the same thing that Avicenna said later. And the subject of self-knowledge is the subject of a study of biology, sociology, psychology, poetry, mathematics, economics, art, history, everything that you think of, every area of study that you think of, has the element of quest for better understanding of human beings in it. So it is a vast topic, and I have neither the knowledge nor the time to be able to share with you even a small portion of this wide, magnificent question. So we will struggle together a little bit, try to understand self-knowledge. And to begin with, we should focus on the one part of the issue of self-knowledge, which is knowledge. Just to have a little idea of the issue of knowledge. And of course, as usual, my talks at this series are based on my understanding of the teachings of the Baha'i faith. That doesn't mean that this is an ultimate understanding or correct understanding or complete understanding. It's just a personal understanding of these concepts. So it should be taken as such. But I came across a very interesting statement about knowledge by Abdul Baha, the center of the covenant of the Baha'i faith. And as we read it, you will see that the Baha'i perspective about the time that we live is very different from the current perspective in the world. The current perspective in the world is fundamentally negative. When people talk about our world today, in any area of human endeavor, they find the world to be in difficulty, in problem, in violence, poverty, disease, inequality, injustice, you name it, everything is there. But somehow Baha'is have a different understanding of that, and we have to understand that difference in a manner that would be in harmony with the realities that people also experience in life. Anyway, Abdul Baha says, this is a brilliant century. Now, isn't that interesting? That's at the beginning of 20th century or end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. And Abdul Baha is making this statement, okay? He says, this is a brilliant century. Eyes are now open to the beauty of the oneness of humanity, of love and of brotherhood. The darkness of suppression will disappear, and the light of unity will shine. We cannot bring love and unity to pass merely by talking of it. Knowledge is not enough. Wealth, science, education are good, we know. But we must also work and study. Now, this is the culmination of this paragraph. He says, knowledge is not enough. Wealth, science, education are good. We know. But we must also work and study to bring to maturity the fruit of knowledge. And that is the whole dilemma before humanity. We have a lot of knowledge, but our knowledge that we have is in a state of potentiality. It is not matured. We use whatever knowledge we have in an immature way. A good example of it is what, for example, we have done with the internet. You see, internet is such a remarkable tool in the hands of humanity. But look what we have done with it. It has become a place of gossip, a place of backbiting, a place of lying, tyranny. You know how to make bombs, how to, it's just amazing what we do. This means that we have not brought the fruit of our knowledge to maturity. And this we should keep in mind as we discuss about self-knowledge. One of the fundamental objectives of self-knowledge is bring ourselves and our understanding of ourselves to maturity, to understand ourselves in a mature way. Okay, that's one part that I understood. The other quotation that I want to start as the beginning of our discourse is the whole notion of how we view the process of self-knowledge in the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah says, O my servants, could ye apprehend with what wonders of my munificence and bounty I have willed to entrust your souls, ye would of a truth rid yourselves of attachment to all created things, and would gain a true knowledge of your own selves, a knowledge which is the same as the comprehension of my own being. Here, Baha'u'llah says that our souls is a wondrous gift that we have to understand it. And we have to focus on that understanding of ourselves, our essence of ourselves, our soul, our essence. And in doing so, we would be on the path of knowing God. In other words, if we don't know ourselves, we cannot know anybody else, and definitely we cannot know the ultimate, which is God. Okay. And for the Baha'i faith, of course, the whole issue of knowledge of God is one of the main fundamental purpose of life. So that's why in our prayers every day we say, I bear witness, O God, that thou hast created me to know thee, to go to know God, and then to worship God. So these two statements give us some clue about the dynamics of, at least about the importance of self-knowledge and the kind of knowledge that we are talking about, mature knowledge. Mature knowledge. And Baha'u'llah says again that man should know his own self and recognize that which leadeth unto loftiness or lowliness, glory or abasement, wealth or poverty. Again, here is the purpose of knowledge, self-knowledge, is to understand the processes that would make us to evolve, to develop, to grow, to become ever more refined, ever more enlightened, ever more knowledgeable, ever more loving, ever more caring, to evolve, to develop constantly. So is not, the purpose of knowledge is not only to know our weaknesses and our difficulties and our problems. The purpose of knowledge is also to find out what can we do so that we get out of the negative qualities that we find ourselves and go towards the positive one. And one final statement here, Baha'u'llah, in one of his writings, in the Hidden Words of Baha'u'llah, he says that we should bring ourselves to account every day because we don't know when we are going to die. And the whole issue of when we die and we go to the next life, and suddenly we see the book of our deeds and the path of our life, then that becomes a very, very dramatic loss if we haven't focused on that. So these are some of the issues that give us both the importance of self-knowledge, and also we have to see what is the purpose, the ultimate purpose of self-knowledge. You know, we ask ourselves why we are here. And if you go and study, look at the books and literature and everything, they say that we are here in the world in order to survive, in order to be happy, in order to accomplish, in order to be successful, in order to get wealthy, to get drunk, all of the things that you can do with wealth, to have Mercedes-Benz, or I don't know what kind of car is the best car, but have one of those. Different people have these notions of, what is the purpose of human life. Many people's idea of life is that they be successful and they get ahead and they have fun and they have pleasure and they have enjoyment. All of these are good. But they are not necessarily mature ways of thinking about who we are as human beings. Okay? They are not necessarily that. And therefore, one of the fundamental objectives of every religion in its pure form is to give a blueprint for life to people, to show people what our life should be all about, how should we live, in what direction we should go, because otherwise we would get lost in the very dangerous, very demanding, and very seductive world of natural dimension of life. In other words, our desires. Human desires and human wishes are so powerful that they can just focus you on constantly trying to satisfy your desires. And when you do that, then we really wouldn't have the time to focus on anything else. And that's where different addictions would come to the forefront. Not only addiction to drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or something like that, but addiction to power, addiction to pleasure, addiction to teasing other people, addiction to getting ahead of other people. We have so many addictions that we have that preoccupy our lives with them, finding faults in other people. These are all, backbiting, gossip. These are all addictions that we develop to fill our lives and respond to our desires. So I began to reflect on, okay, as a Baha'i, what should be my life? Why am I created? What the Baha'i writings say. So I came across two quotations that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but I just want to read it for you and to see how it comes across, okay? The first one says, all men, in the Baha'i writings when say men, it means men and women, everybody. All men have been created to carry forward. We have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. Now, that's a very difficult job, don't you think? Sitting here, a number of ordinary people, And we have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. How we are going to do it? So, Baha'u'llah says, all men have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. The Almighty beareth me witness to act like the beasts of the field is unworthy of man. Those virtues that befit his dignity are, what do you think? First, forbearance. Forbearance. Mercy. Compassion. And loving kindness to all the peoples and kindreds of the earth. So if we want to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization, we have to teach ourselves how to be a person who has forbearance, who has the capacity for mercy, who has the capacity for compassion, and loving kindness to all the peoples of the world. Which means that I have to get rid of my prejudices, which means that I have to become universal, means that I have to have the capacity and the willingness to love everyone. And that is one of the most great challenges that we have, because we usually choose few people, create a little universe of 5, 10, 20, 50 people around us. And we become focused on that. And it is easy to show compassion and forbearance and mercy to people that we know and who are like us and so forth. But doing it for all humanity is a different story. Different story. You see? And the world, you see what is happening in our world today? Think of it, if peoples of the world in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Egypt, in everywhere in the world, in Africa, in South America, if we all had forbearance for each other and compassion and mercy toward each other, look, you think what would happen to this world, you see. So, one of the things that we have to teach ourselves are these qualities. I came across another quotation which describes the same kind of a thing. And here this quotation says, the first, the fundamental purpose underlying creation. Now, isn't that interesting? The first and the fundamental purpose underlying creation hath ever been and will continue to be none other than appearance of what? Well, here is a little bit different. Yeah. Trustworthiness. Trustworthiness. Godliness. Sincerity and goodwill amongst mankind. This is the purpose of creation. That we become trustworthy people, godlike people, sincere people, and people with a goodwill towards all humanity. That's the purpose, the fundamental purpose of creation and life. That's fundamental. Why? Baha'u'llah says why. For these qualities are the cause of peace. Cause of peace, security, and tranquility. Right? When you have trustworthiness, sincerity, goodwill, then you create peace and security for humanity. The leaders of world nowadays, whenever you talk about them, what they talk about? We want to create a secure, safe, secure country, right? Security. Security is, everybody is talking about security. Everybody talks about we want to have peaceful society, you see? And the first thing that they have to have is trustworthiness. And that's the last thing they have. You see, nobody trusts anybody, right? Leaders don't trust each other. Leaders don't trust their people. People don't trust their leaders. What is missing in our world today is trustworthiness. And therefore, peace is missing. And security is missing. Isn't it? And tranquility is missing. Isn't that interesting? How these things are related to the purpose of our life. And then the whole issue of self-knowledge becomes, am I in possession of these qualities? And if not, how can I possess them? How can I bring those about? So this is the whole issue of the purpose of our life and relationship to self-knowledge. Now, the next item that arrives here is that self-knowledge is difficult. First, it is difficult because there are a lot of things about ourselves that we don't want to know. Okay? It is extremely painful to look at ourselves. You know, it's extremely painful because we don't want to know many things that we know are not nice about ourselves. Okay? And therefore we do everything possible to avoid looking at ourselves. This other issue related to that is the whole issue of ego. Ego, self-love in a negative way, selfishness, is very powerful force in human beings. And the reason that is powerful is because we human beings are born very weak. We are born weak and dependent on others, and our life and our security and survival is dependent on other people. So when we observe nature, we see something very interesting. In animals, the process of self-protection and survival is much stronger than in humans. In animals, the young animals, after their birth, they are dependent on their parents for a very short period of time. And soon they become independent. Soon they know how to protect themselves. Okay? Soon, matter of days and matter of, at the most, weeks, they're done. Human beings, they go for years and still are dependent. For years. They have to be protected and they have to be taken care of. And even when they become strong and they become adult and they become things, still they need somebody else to take care of them and to be together, take care of each other. So we human beings actually have been born and have been created in such a way that we remain dependent on the care of other people practically for all of our lives. We human beings cannot live without other human beings. The birds can. Okay? They live, they fly, they go, they find their food, they go on a tree, they make a nest, and so forth. We human beings cannot do that. If we want to make a nest, we need all kinds of people to help us to build this building. If we want to eat, we need all kinds of people in order to prepare the food for us and so forth. We cannot do it ourselves. If we try to do it, we would live a very elementary, primitive life. But when you look around it in the complex world that we live, we see that we are totally interdependent. We all are dependent on each other. We all need each other. So, this fact that we all need each other, but at the same time we are too proud to commit that we need other people, it puts us in a very difficult situation. Okay? Because we need each other and we need other people, then we cover a lot of our negative qualities, try to cover them rather than transform them, rather than change them. You see? And also, we don't want to be discovered. Because we need other people, we don't want to be discovered that we have weak points. So the whole notion of self-knowledge in human beings becomes much more difficult. And self-knowledge in human beings always takes place in the context of relationships. And in the relationships, many times we find a problem. Here is, I tell you few statements so you see what I mean about the whole challenge of self-knowledge. In the writings of Baha'i faith, how could thou forget thine own faults and busy thyself with the faults of others? So many times we focus on fault of others. And the reason that we do is because we don't want to focus on our faults. Basically we say, if this person, that person out there, has these faults, then I'm okay. You see? As long as you focus on other people's faults, then you're okay. The whole idea of backbiting is that. The whole idea of fault finding is that. Finding faults in others. It's a habit of humanity in the earlier stages of its maturation. The less mature we are, the more faults we find in others. The more mature we are, the more faults we find in ourselves. This is the dynamic of maturation. Okay. The famous, renowned Sufi poet, Rumi, says, "Oh, happy the soul that saw its own faults." Because if you see your own faults, you can change. If you don't see it, you're stuck. Okay. People of the world don't look at themselves, he says, so they blame one another. If we don't look at ourselves, we blame each other. Now, the other thing that, again, Rumi says, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. These are the challenges of self-knowledge. Now, let's think a little bit about dimensions of self-knowledge. It seems to me that self-knowledge has at least 3 dimensions. One is physical, the other one is psychological, and the third one is spiritual. So if we want to understand ourselves, it's a good idea to focus on our physical dimension, our psychological dimension, or spiritual dimension. These are all dimensions of a human being. Every human being has those dimensions, those aspects. At the physical dimension, as I said, biologically, we are created with certain instinctive forces within us in order to help us to survive as human beings, as living beings. And those have been described as self-preservation. Every one of us has this instinct to preserve ourselves. Pleasure-seeking. We all have natural tendency to seek pleasure. And pain avoidance. We also have a natural quality of avoiding pain. These are the fundamental aspects of biological process that we have to understand. How do we deal with our survival? How do we approach our survival? How do we approach the whole issue of pleasure and gratification, and how we deal with pain? And remember that we all experience all of these things in life. You know, we all experience pain. We all experience moments of gratification. We all experience moments in which our survival is in danger. And we have to develop an understanding of how we can deal with these issues in a mature way. And as we will talk, you will see that ultimately the greatest, the most secure way of safeguarding our security is to be in unity with other people. If we are in unity with each other, we are all safe. If we are disunited, we are in danger. Okay? And the whole issue of pleasure and gratification is one of the great pitfalls of maturation. The more we try to seek instant gratification, the less we have the opportunity for maturation. Because, as Einstein said, happiness, and he meant pleasure, is for pigs. Okay? For pigs. You know, pigs are very happy when they are in their pig sty and, you know, get everything, eat it, and make noise and do all kind of things that pigs do, you know. And most people suddenly allow themselves to be in that mode, okay? And from a psychological perspective, one of the signs of maturation of human beings is the ability to postpone gratification. In other words, the ability to be in control of our desire to gratify ourselves, our desires, rather than our desires being in control of ourselves. When our desires are in control of ourselves, we become addicted. When we are in control of our desires, we become free. The true freedom comes that way, you see. And that applies both to the whole issue of, the whole issue of pleasure seeking. And then the whole issue of pain is the understanding of the nature and dynamics of pain, the purpose of pain. People who don't believe in God, they say, well, if God is merciful, why he created pain? But reflect for a moment about how important pain is to live for life. Just reflect for a moment. If we didn't feel pain, we would die as a matter of instantly or shortly without knowing it, okay? For example, if you suddenly, you experience pain here, and if you don't pay attention to it, it turns into acute appendicitis. And if you don't pay attention to it, it ruptures, and then you die. The only reason that you pay attention to it is because you experience pain. If you didn't experience pain, that's it. That's the end of you. Okay? And then if you go to the doctor and doctor says, oh, you have pain there, here is some painkillers, then you take the painkiller and you die happily. Okay? Without pain. But you die nevertheless because the purpose of pain is give you a signal that something is wrong. Okay? There is a signal for you. The leprosy. What is leprosy? Leprosy is the disease in which you don't feel pain. And that's the reason that the lepers become disfigured. Because they don't feel pain, so they cut themselves and all kind of things without, being able to do that. The whole notion of Christ healing the leper, meaning Christ giving consciousness to humanity so that they feel pain of each other. And they feel the pain of their own lack of maturation. That they become aware of the state that they are, that should give them suffering so that they would change. The purpose of suffering and pain is for us as individuals to become more and more aware of the dynamics of our biological, psychological development and maturation and spiritual, and also to become aware of the conditions of others and to have empathy, Recently, they have done a research, very recent, a few days ago, the research was announced, the results of it in Europe. They found that in laboratory mice, they found that there is in the genes of mice a special kind of a gene that has the capacity for compassion. That when they see other mice suffering, the centers of the brain and that area that is correspondent with compassion in the person who is not, in the mice that is not suffering, also begins, that part of the brain begins to become activated. And they found that the only way that it becomes activated is when the new mice is born, is given licking by mother, which is sign of love, okay, sign of compassion. And if the mice was separated from mother before it was licked, that mice becomes aggressive and becomes violent toward other mice, while the others don't. So then they said, could it be in human beings there is also a center in the brain that does the same thing? And sure enough, they found that yes, in human beings also, there is a center in which when we see suffering of others, we also, that part of our brain begins to activate as though we are suffering. Okay? And we all have experienced that, I'm sure. Okay? The issue now is, and the researcher was asked the question, he said, do you know how can we increase the compassion? He said, we don't know. We have to find out now. But it is obvious, when in the writings of different religions, we see in the writings of the Baha'i faith, we see the whole notion of being compassionate to all humanity is because human beings by nature are born to be compassionate. And if we create an environment which encourages that, then we will feel ourselves increasingly more and more compassionate toward others. Okay. How many of you have watched some little person, some innocent person, somebody suffering on television and tears coming your face down? How many times? I'm sure you have all experienced it. Because we are connected. And there is natural for us, for human beings. What we have to do is to make it conscious, to bring ourselves to more and more aware of these capacities within ourselves. So one aspect of self-knowledge is the biological. The second aspect of self-knowledge, dimension of self-knowledge, is psychological. And as we have talked about here many times, the three powers of human psyche, human soul, the power to know, the power to feel, and the power to make decisions. All of these, they are issues that we have to become aware of. What are my thoughts? Why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking? Why in this situation I think this way and in that situation I think, in similar situation with another person I think differently? How come? What is it? We constantly have to ask ourselves questions. We constantly have to become aware of our feelings. And there are two sets of feelings. The negative feelings and positive feelings, right? Feelings of anger, fear, anxiety. On one side, the feelings of calm and certitude and joy. On the other hand, the same. And there are others feelings. All feelings are barometers of what? All feelings are barometers of the state of our love relationships. Okay? If we feel angry and resentful and sad and anxious, we have to ask ourselves, we have to look at our love relationships, loving relationships with ourselves, with others, with our family, with what the job we do, the studies we do, whatever we do. You have to see what is happening with development of our love. Because the whole idea of becoming human is to become ever more loving, ever more knowing, and ever more loving. And ever more in control of oneself. When we are in control of oneself, our will, then we are free. So we constantly have to become ever more loving, ever more knowing, ever more free. Freedom here means self-control. Okay? As long as you have self-control, you're free. You see? As soon as I lose my self-control, then I am in bad shape. For example, I have this telephone in my hand. As long as I have it in my hand, I am free to do whatever I want to do with it. I can call somebody. I can throw it at somebody. No. Somebody else did it for me. Thank you. Because I wasn't going to throw. You know, I can throw at somebody. I can do whatever I want to do. I can give it as a gift to somebody. I can do. I have freedom. As long as I have the control, I have freedom. But as soon as I let it go, my freedom is gone. You see? So these are the notion, because we have such a misunderstanding about notion of freedom. Because we think freedom means not having control. While in reality, freedom means having self-control. Having self-control, not control over other people. Self-control. You see? And then comes, of course, these are a very brief discussion of these issues, comes the spiritual dimension of humanity. And if you want to think of a development of our spiritual dimension, think of how universal you are, how inclusive are you, how integrative are you, how creative are you. Creative meaning not only what Armand did here with his fantastic music and Beethoven and whatever, but to create something. But also creative means to create ourselves. Of all creative activities, what the most important thing that we create is the kind of personality that we create in ourselves. Help ourselves to evolve, to emerge, to develop. Okay. So the process of spiritual development and self-knowledge. You see, self-knowledge, first we have to become knowledge of our biological forces, as I said, and how we deal with it, and then our psychological forces, our knowledge, love, and will. All of these are dynamics of development of individual. We become more and more aware of ourself. The spiritual dimension of self is the manner in which we become selfless. We first develop ourselves, and then we sacrifice ourselves in the service of others. So it is a very peculiar process that first we have to develop ourselves, and then we have to sacrifice that ourselves. So we become somebody, and then we become selfless. Okay, this is the spiritual dilemma. And that's what modern humanity, which is adolescent humanity, focuses on the first part and rejects the second part. You see, because humanity right now is collectively in the level of adolescence. We are not mature. But a mature human being becomes selfless. It is a mature human being that is when he's a parent at night doesn't sleep. For years and years are concerned with the care of that child. Giving everything possible. Selflessness emerges because we are maturing, we are evolving. And when we don't do that, of course, we suffer and our children suffer and everybody around us suffer and so forth. Anyway, so it is a process of selflessness and self-sacrifice takes place always in the context of relationships. Relationship with ourselves, for example, to the degree that I can postpone my desire to gratify myself, to the degree that I have control over my impulse to find faults in other people, to the degree that I have the discipline to focus on a creative act, academic or artistic, to the degree that I'm willing to take care of others and not be preoccupied with my own comfort. To that degree in that relationship, I'm making myself to evolve and to become and to sacrifice it. And as you know, to sacrifice something means to make it sacred. You don't give up yourself. You make yourself sacred. Okay, that's the meaning of sacrifice. Meaning of sacrifice is that whatever you have, you make it sacred. Self-sacrifice means to make yourself, your true being, who you are, sacred. So it's a marvelous process, actually, when you think of it. And then, in the context of relationship with others, the whole issue that we read, compassion and forbearance and loving kindness to all humanity, these are all our processes that help us to develop our spiritual dimension. And of course, then is the relationship with God, which is the foundation of all relationships. That's a different process. Now, so far what we have done, we have talked briefly about why self-knowledge, how important it is, what are the challenges of it, what are dimensions of it. Now we should talk a little bit about the process of self-knowledge. Okay? Because everything evolves. And self-knowledge also evolves. It just doesn't happen like that. It goes through different stages. Okay, so at least we can identify three cumulative stages. By cumulative, I mean you go from one stage and then add a second stage to it and then add a third, okay? You don't give up one and then to the second and third, okay? That's the cumulative, okay? It's like life experiences. You add to your experiences constantly as you evolve. The first stage of self-knowledge is self-discovery. Discovery of our physical capacities, our psychological capacities, our creative capacities, our intellectual capacities, all kind of capacities that we have is the self-discovery. First we have to discover our emotional, our intellectual, our physical capacities. Okay? And this is why we go to schools, we go to universities, We do all kind of studies, we do practices, we do all of these things. These are the process of self-discovery, which takes place throughout life, but is more pronounced during earlier stages of life. Then the second stage is a stage of self-development. We discover things about ourselves. Now we have to develop them to make them better and better and better, okay? I bet 10 years ago, Armand couldn't play the way that he played today, right? Or John didn't know as much about economics as he does know. And that applies to all of us, okay? We discover things about ourselves, and now we have to develop them. You see, one of the very interesting things in the writings of the Bab in the Baha'i faith is that he says he says everything has a heaven. And the heaven of everything, of every person, everything, is when you reach to the highest level of its development. So as we develop our intellectual capacities, our emotional capacities, our artistic capacities, our capacities of compassion and so forth, we are getting closer and closer to our own heaven. Okay? Until hopefully we all become heavenly. But anyway. But it's self-development. So first stage is the stage of self-discovery. The second stage is self-development. If you want to put it in the context of a tree, the self stage is the stage of development of roots and trunk and branches and leaves. The second stage of development, is the stage of blossoming. We become beautiful and say, look at me, how beautiful I am, Like that, I'm sure you all have seen almond tree when it blossoms. It's so beautiful. It's so absolutely beautiful. So this Japanese haiku says, I asked the almond tree, oh sister, tell me of God. And the almond tree blossomed. Okay? And the almond tree blossomed. So we all blossom. Okay? In our 20s and 30s and 40s, we are blossoming. Okay? And we go around and say, look at me, how magnificent I am, how gorgeous I am, how excellent I am, how good I am, and so forth. This is marvelous, okay? And we all want that it lasts. That's the whole quest for eternal youth. And then comes the third stage. And that's the stage of self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is when you have fruits. Fruit of a tree is not good for the tree. It's good for others. It's to bring new life, to give nurturance to others. Okay? It is not for the tree. As a matter of fact, when the tree is really fruitful, the branches break. Okay? Because it's too heavy. And these are the stages of life. So we start from self-discovery, go to self-development, and go to self-sacrifice. Now, the interesting thing about human being is that at any given time, you're engaged in all three. You're engaged in self-development because it doesn't matter how much we develop, we can develop further. There doesn't come a time that say, okay, now I've loved enough or I know enough. Doesn't matter how much you develop, you can say, okay, I have developed enough. So we are constantly discovering new things about ourselves, constantly evolving and developing our new discoveries, and constantly giving it to others. And giving it to others has to be a conscious, deliberate action. Otherwise, we become selfish. Otherwise, our lives would blossom, and the blossoms at best give you a crab apple. Okay? And nothing else. Okay? Doesn't become a delicious apple. So it is really important that we make sure that our lives are fruitful. And fruits of the tree of human life is for others. It's not for ourselves. Now, in October 1911, when Abdul Baha was in England, he said something which I think is good to read it here at this moment. He said, "Forget self and work for the whole race." Remember, you see, he's talking to British. Okay? His audience are British. And you remember, British are totally focused on self. Like George Alexander Louis right now, okay? Yeah. They're all focused on themselves, okay? At that time, in 1911, the British were the powerful force in the world, okay? And here is this prisoner, the guy who has been in prison for 50 years, 40 years, 40-some years. He has just been freed from prison, from Ottoman prison. And he comes to the West. And he goes to churches and universities and synagogues and places, and he talks to these audiences. And he's here in this audience, and what does he tell them? He says, "Forget self and work for the whole race. Remember always that one is working for the world, not for a town or even for a country. Because as all are brethren, so every country is, as it were, one's own." Isn't that interesting? That, he is putting it, the notion of becoming universal. Universal. If you want to become spiritual, you have to become universal. So this is a brief discussion of different aspects of self-knowledge. Now, let me also share with you few statements from others, much more knowledgeable and much more, the great ones, nothing to do with me, who have said about self and self-knowledge. Here is an advice from Confucius. Okay, Confucius is a good guy because that's billions of people following him. Okay, he said, "When you meet someone better than yourself, turn your thoughts to becoming his equal. When you meet someone not as good as you are, look within and examine yourself." Isn't that beautiful? This is secret of self-development, self-knowledge. Not finding faults in others. Not busying ourselves with the faults of others, busying ourselves with our own need to evolve and to grow. As you know, Buddha was a prince. And he was born and raised in absolute luxury. And then one time he went out to town to people, population. And he saw somebody that was old. And he was surprised. He said to his companion, "Who is that?" He said, "Well, all people eventually get old." In the palace here, everybody that had been around him had been young people taken care of. Then one other time, he was out and he saw somebody was sick. He said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, everybody gets sick. That's the lot of humanity." And the third time, he was out and he saw a corpse. Somebody was dead. And again, he was surprised. And it was after these three experiences that he decided to leave the castle and decided to go and search for understanding the purpose of life. And the rest, of course, is a remarkable history. One final note. As you notice, we go from stage to stage to stage. And also, in a different sense, we are in the womb of our mothers. We are born into this world. We die. In this world, we have many experiences, and then we go. So, life is a journey. Or put it in a more positive term, life is a pilgrimage. Life is a pilgrimage. And this pilgrimage, from a Baha'i perspective, can either end into nothingness if we don't develop ourselves, or it puts us on a journey of eternity. That's the reason that we, in our obligatory prayers every day, we pray that we could go on a journey of eternity. But in journey of eternity means that we have to develop self-knowledge and develop ourselves and sacrifice ourselves so that we make ourselves, our reality, sacred. Because it is only the sacred reality of the soul that can live forever, not the body. So, thinking of life as a pilgrimage, Abdul Baha says, of all pilgrimages, the greatest is to relieve the sorrow-laden heart. Of all pilgrimages, the greatest is to relieve the sorrow-laden heart, which means ultimately when we dedicate ourselves to loving others, decreasing the pain of others, visiting the sorrows of others, being not focused on self and focused on others. As we do that, the less self-centered we become and the more universal we become, the more we develop not only our capacities for compassion, for love, for care, which at the beginning we said are the purpose of our creation in order to create peace and unity and tranquility in this world. Not only that, but also the more we do that, the more universal we become. Okay, dear friends, thank you so much. See you in the